Hi everyone. So today our panel is going to be about the balance between creativity and ROI, really. In the past 10 years, digital has disrupted the industry like nothing before, which I think has got everyone kind of questioning all the other mediums in a way. Digital is obviously measurable and can show ROI, so it's often the preferred medium of choice. Henry Ford once said, "I know that at least half of my marketing budget works, I just don't know which half." I think now we're getting a little bit closer to knowing which half does pay, I guess. But don't get me wrong, people are still moved by creativity and engagement, and advertising is a balancing act between achieving creativity and ROI. But in a tough economic climate, the quest for ROI, and let's be honest, sales, has become even more important. So how do we use commercial savviness while still inspiring consumers? I'm hoping our lovely panelists here can help us shed some light on this. So let me introduce you to Melissa and Michelle. Melissa ran Creative Spark Digital Agency and oversaw the integration into MNC Saatchi. She now consults on a number of companies locally and abroad on digital initiatives. Michelle is ex-Hello Computer and was heavily involved in facilitating integration with FCB. She then started and ran Culture Digital Agency before joining Elevator as essentially first our head of digital, and now she heads up our integrated studio. So, getting onto our first topics. So the first one is kind of, I guess, let's just touch on ROI and creativity and the tension between the two. So I guess, is there a time, Melissa, when you think brands should focus on one or the other, or is it always a balance of the two?
I think as a marketer, it's actually a balance of the two. Just to talk about the tension that we experience as a marketer, I often have the tension when it comes to defining what ROI is in the beginning of your campaign. So often when you're running a campaign, you've got several objectives, but as it's running, you find often, since I'm a digital marketer, my clients often ask me, what's the ROI? And I often go back to them and I say, what did you define as the measurement of success for your campaign? And they battle to answer. So we have to make this up for them as we go along. Things like conversions is an ROI, or impressions is an ROI. So for me, I think the tension comes into setting your objectives and your measurement for success in the beginning before asking at the end, what was the ROI of this campaign? It's a big lesson I learned from there. But just on the point of can brands do both? I think you absolutely can do both. There's some amazing campaigns we have seen. They are really creative, but they are also focused on ROI. But it depends on what their ROI is. If it's impressions, if it's brand awareness, or if it's clicks. Well, do you want to ask about examples that we saw?
Yeah, I think you guys mentioned some examples earlier when you were chatting on some of the brands you think that are doing it quite well. Yeah,
before we get to Mesh, I'll chat to you about the one example that I saw. It was Deadpool. I don't know if you guys watched Deadpool 2. Some of the videos were actually, before it got really annoying, they stopped those teaser videos. Deadpool started marketing about a year before the movie came out. And they released all these little teaser videos. You'd see them on YouTube. You'd see Celine Dion tweeting about Deadpool. You'd see him sitting with David Beckham. It was a year before the actual movie came out. But that way of releasing these videos I found was incredibly creative. And it wasn't boring. They were short enough to hold your attention and make you laugh. But for the ROI at the end was that they were, I think now, sitting at the biggest opening week in the US, second only to Deadpool 1. So for me, that's a great example of creativity working together with your ROI.
Interesting. Mish, what is your opinion, I guess, on the tension and the balance?
So, I personally think that a brand has a journey. And I very much see brands kind of like running like 3-year cycles. So let's take, for example, when you're launching, we work with alcohol a lot, so let's use an example of a new alcohol brand to the market. like your first kind of effort would be to get liquid on lips, for example. So then you're not really going to focus so much on creativity, you're not going to focus so much on building brand awareness. All that you want to focus on at that point in time is to get kind of like the product into the consumer's hands. Thereafter, you start building that brand and that brand kind of loyalty with your consumers. So to probably answer your question, I think that there's a balance, and I think the balance is in the journey. So where in this product life cycle are you, and where does ROI become more important than creativity? And it's in a constant kind of like rotation of flux, I also believe. So for me, like launching a product is like a 3-year cycle where you start in, you get the liquid on lips, you then bring in like your creativity, which builds that brand love and that brand trust. Not that consumers have trust for brands anymore, we'll get to that in a later stage. but it starts kind of like building trust, and then from there on it actually goes, maybe swaps around. And as you know, the world is like in constant, like everything is fluid these days, from what do they call it, pansexual, to what brands you use, to like fluidity is a proper thing. And I think that if we see ROI and creativity in that same fluid movement, and you apply it in the correct time in the product's journey, I think you could achieve massive success.
Great. You mentioned a few of the examples you thought that brands that did well.
So I wanted to use Vodacom as an example before our lovely speaker next to us is from MTN, so we're scrapping that. So one of the examples, I think, I'm not too sure if you guys are aware of Nike. Obviously Nike, but they've recently started using Snapchat e-commerce platform to start selling some of their shoes. So Nike obviously has a massive creative backend that believe in like brand building and brand love and all of that, and they spend a lot of money in creating that. And I think what's really interesting about this connection with Snapchat and e-commerce is that they have managed to take this very exclusive audience who are so loyal and so kind of like into the brand, and they've given them this exclusive channel to start purchasing. So do you guys know about Snapchat's e-commerce and Nike Jordan's campaign? Please Google it online and I'll just give you a brief summary of it. So basically, Snapchat launched their e-commerce platform, and Nike had a new shoe, very exclusive Jordan shoe that they were releasing. They released it only to Snapchat. There was about 100 shoes, and in an hour they sold 100 shoes on Snapchat just with that experience. And I think that's a really good example of I love this brand, therefore I'm purchasing it because they're in my space, they understand my life, and they're contributing to my life. So that's one of my examples.
Anything to add?
No, I think on your point, it's also the relevance of it, because they're targeting their content to you because they've engaged with you before. So I think another point about creativity is also about relevance. If you've come up with great campaigns that in your mind are beautiful, creative, and you've invested a lot into it, but if it's not relevant to the audience that you're targeting, it's going to fall flat. It is quite subjective, but you can win with relevance and with great targeting.
Completely. I think that kind of brings us into our next topic, which is content. We see this impacting each and every channel. Experiential, for example, is more about what you capture and share online than actually being there. Where do you see content going in the future?
I'll start.
I'm
always going to start. I think for me, the trends that I'm seeing now as a marketer that's practicing with clients in various different industries, everyone has this buzzword on their lips called personalization, but they're not too sure how to get there. And a lot of people want to go into personalization when it comes to content, but they're not really willing to put in the foundations, the foundational work, the segmentation of your database, the understanding of insights, and the interrogation of analytics. But I think as we get there's going to be a huge content trend when it comes to personalization. Content meaning your newsletters, your social media ads, even things like syncing your TV ads to Twitter conversations. It's all going to be quite personalized, and it's going to be much more, I think more deeper when it comes to targeting. So we know a lot about the audience, more than we'll ever know before, but I think deep targeting and personalization is a big trend for me.
Content.
Yeah, just to add to that, I think that,
Okay, so the right content delivered at the right time to the right audience for me is really, really critical. And you were talking about it and how we get there. And with these multiple channels, multiple screens that we have, like it becomes more and more difficult for marketers to deliver that content to the right place at the right time. So I think that more than content is such a critical thing. Like we have to make sure that it fits within our consumers' lives. They are fluid. We don't understand it. But more than that, I think how we deliver that content to be accurate to that person's life in order to create an action is almost becoming more important than what that content is at the end of the day.
Yeah, and I completely agree. And I think going back to something we're always talking about is just targeting correctly and targeting well, and also timing. People often forget about timing.
Yeah.
And presenting your content at the right time when it comes to that purchasing decision, when you're researching a product or when you are looking for advice, when you're reading reviews of a product online. Just understanding that time and the consumer's journey to purchase a little bit better.
Yeah, it's very interesting. So a really good example of that. So I follow Michael Jordan quite a bit on Twitter, and he posted an article quite recently between medical aid and medical insurance. And it was so interesting, like after reading that, because it was in a time where I'm kind of like probably also looking at some medical aid stuff. The right article at the right time, presented by the right person, can change your perception of that product or that purchase.
Completely. I think that's kind of the link over from content to e-commerce, and how do we make it work the best it can. I recently saw a case study on Tommy Hilfiger that did a fashion show that was linking live content to e-commerce. So essentially you could watch it live and go straight through to a sale on those products. So e-commerce is growing at a steady pace. Sorry, this clicker. Too many things to remember. E-commerce is growing at a steady pace at the moment in South Africa, but it doesn't just need to be about sales. Obviously, it can still have creative thinking around it and link into authentic content. How do you think e-commerce is going to evolve in South Africa over the next few years?
I think it's actually going to evolve into various different streams. So there's mobile commerce, which is, I'm actually really excited for the next 3 years when it comes to mobile commerce, because I think there's going to be a huge diversity in payment options. There's also a big move now changing from cash to digitization, especially for things like the informal market. So cashless transactions where banking facilities are far or unreliable to communities. So what we used to call previously unreachable communities. Digital is starting to disrupt there as well. I also think, I love that idea of shoppable content or shoppable experiences, because I experienced it the other day. I wanted to purchase something, but I had to go all the way back to the e-commerce store to go purchase a product because their ads didn't link to the actual product. They were trying to sell the great experience about that product, but I was like, oh, I want to buy it right now. I don't want to leave my Facebook experience now, go log in. I can't remember what my password is anymore, and which credit card is linked. I would really like to just have one profile where I can purchase on any platform that I'm on. Which leads me to another trend that I'm also looking at, and that is the trends in how we treat data, personal data, your personal information. There's a lot of services that are allowing you to integrate your profile. So you can renew your driver's license, look at houses, get qualified for a bond, all of that. Like you can do it on your FNB app now. But who owns that data? Does FNB own it? Does it belong to you? So I think with the trends and how e-commerce is growing in South Africa, there's so many different industries that are being disrupted at the same time. Things like your banking experience, and also things like the fulfillment cycle, couriers, logistics, they're also being disrupted. They're ripe for disruption when it comes to e-commerce, because you kind of want it with one service provider. So that's kind of where I see e-commerce going, just the evolution of that fulfillment cycle as well.
Yeah, I think it's going to be vast and exciting.
It's happening fast, yeah.
And Mish, in your opinion?
So I think e-commerce is very much in its infinite stages. So when I open Superbalist or any of Takealot, whatever, it reminds me of the dial-up from back in the days. Remember internet? So and now we literally pick up your phone and you immediately connect it, and it's such a seamless thing, you don't even think about it, you just automatically connect it. And I think e-commerce at the moment, if you think about it, is such an unnatural experience. So you go through this catalog of stuff and you might want things or not. So you go through this catalog and then you click things and you put it in a basket and you pay for it, and then a couple of days later it arrives. But if you think about like back in the early 90s, we went to like the mall, for example, and we had, that was our day out. Shame, Springs. Anyway, so the day out was like in the mall, and we walked around with friends and family, and you like came across and you were listening to music and musica, and you're like, oh, this is a great song, and then you end up buying the DVD, and all of that is an experience. And I think if e-commerce can start mimicking that experience and fulfilling in that moment, that's kind of like where I see e-commerce kind of like going. And in a couple of years' time, I think we're going to look back to like these big catalogs that we browse through to try and select things from. I think also like habits of our consumers are changing. For one of the consumer trends that really impacts this market is snacking. So nobody's making these big meals anymore. So retailers are changing how they provide food to their customers on a retail perspective. But if you think about something like You Cook, like for me, that is such a seamless experience. I don't know if any of you done You Cook at all. I've recently done, and it's such an amazing experience, like life-changing. Like everything is there. You haven't forgot the damn sour cream. So everything is there, and it's just so easy. And you didn't have to go through these reams and reams of pages to find the sour cream on page number 55 or after you've searched it. So I think that is a very interesting platform, and I can see how retail is going to kind of like start morphing into services like, for example, You Cook and services similar to that. I also think that e-commerce at the moment is, unfortunately, for the very few privileged people in South Africa, it hasn't hit the main marketers yet, and we have issues like, for example, delivery. You were talking about it a little bit earlier. Like, how do you deliver within an informal kind of environment? How do you solve that problem? How do you solve the banking problem? Like, how do you connect it with, if somebody doesn't have a bank account, like, how do you solve that problem? So, yeah, I think e-commerce is a very exciting space, and where it's going to be, I think we're going to be extremely surprised to see, and it's probably not going to look anything like what we have at the moment. So it's going to be completely part of the experience of entertainment or daily lives.
I think your analogy to dial-up is quite interesting, because we all thought it was so amazing, and I think that's what we think about e-commerce at the moment, but we're not actually sure how much more convenient it can get.
Yeah, exactly.
As convenient as possible. I think that's where it's going.
Yeah, definitely convenience. And I think one thing I'm seeing now is people are starting to get ready for voice search. So if you've got a Google Home or an Alexa and you run out of milk, you want that whole process to be fulfilled. You want to say, order me some milk, and it needs to be delivered on a Tuesday. I'm at home. I'd love to see that whole thing really just happening, because right now my Google Home isn't connected to any of my services. It's a bit too early. It can't even order an Uber through it, but it reads me the news headlines. That's it. But I'd love to see the e-commerce world becoming ready for voice search. I think we're ready, but they're not ready.
But don't you think it's like everything else in our digital space? Like when Google first came out, you were like, aeroplane, and that was like kind of like your keyword search. Now it's like sentences, and you can get kind of like very granular in the searches. And I think we have to go through that process, and e-commerce is going through that process of learning how people shop, learning how people are behaving. It's setting some trends, and it's setting some human behavior sections, which will define what it will be in the future.
Exactly. Cool. I think moving on to our next topic, which is kind of the next buzzword of the moment, is influencers, which can be quite a contentious topic. Do you see a time where there'll be a bigger push to sales rather than just product placements? Currently, some brands are even giving influencers profit share for the unique coupons they post. So the question, I guess, to you guys is, what is your opinion of the use of influencers? And does it actually achieve sales ROI, or is it just brand awareness?
I have so many opinions about influence. I'm sure you guys do as well. But I think right now there's still a place for influencer marketing. What I'm seeing now when it comes to influencer campaigns is that people are splitting their campaigns into things like influencer-led campaigns or influencer-supported campaigns. So, but where they're failing, I find quite often, and it goes back to my point about setting your objectives and your measurements for success and defining what your ROI is in the beginning, that people are really not briefing their influencers really well. So I find before we even get into the topic of ROI, we need to work on things like measurement of influencer interactions, putting a value towards things like retweets and interaction, content creation. So I think from my side, we're a little bit behind when it comes to linking ROI or conversions and sales with influencers. We've got a long way to go in terms of standardizing that measurement and also their own rates. Influencers are now asking for payment. They are treated as a media channel. Some of them are lifestyle and some of them are very talented when it comes to content creation, but it's very hard to kind of lump them all into one influencer group. So for me, you can do things like tracking their unique coupons or giving them trackable links for specific campaigns. That's an easy way to track ROI or conversions. But I think for me, we're still a little bit behind when it comes to just getting the measurement and the definition of that ROI when it comes to influencer campaigns.
Influencers. What do you guys think of influencers? So, like, if you think about like why we started using influencers in the first place, is because our audience is searching for authenticity, right? So we wanted people who they believe to say this is the brand that you need to buy. So and that's where it comes from. So now when we start using them as media channels, we go like, here is 150, you must say X, Y, Z. Our consumers are way smarter than that. They're not going to pick up on the authenticity through that. And I think it's really, really important to remember that is why we started using it. And the reason why we started using influencers is because platforms started commoditizing advertising and media. So we needed to find, as brand managers, different ways to influence and be part of our consumers' lives. And it is through these influencers. And I think, to answer your question, like, do they bring ROI? It's really hard to say. Like, you all are influencers within your friends and family. You say, Mom, I really like these high-tech shoes, and have you influenced her to purchase the next pair of high-tech shoes? Probably not, but when she is in the store and there's 2 pairs to choose from, she will probably remember, and that's kind of like the point of influence, right? So I personally, and if you remember what I said earlier about how things are fluid when it comes to ROI versus brand building, I really believe that influencers fit within that brand building space, and within a different channel, not within the same influencer channel, that could lead to a sale or to a click or to a belief or to whatever. But as a pure ROI channel, I don't think that is possible. However, we did a campaign for Twisp. Now, Twisp is everybody knows Twisp, right? Electronic cigarettes. So it's a very difficult client to have, not the client per se, the marketing that we need to do. So there's a lot of restrictions around Google and Facebook, and the point is that online you basically cannot advertise for any electronic cigarettes. So what do we use? We use influencers, and we kind of like, and we can't even mention the URL. Hi! The URL on the influencers post. So basically, I think that the point of that campaign was, what we did is we sent influencers out. They started to use the product. We then very cleverly tracked how many people landed on search, came through search on a specific day when that influencer was using the product and led into a sale. And it was really interesting to see that actually did happen, and the sales were increased by 30%. The problem is that it's not one of those clean case studies that could have been influenced by anything else, but I do think that there is a point. One of the other kind of like examples of what we did with influencer marketing is Lipton. And the smart thing about our Lipton campaign that we delivered was that before we even introduced our product to any of our consumers, or before we started our campaigns, we selected our influencers and we actually took them and we gave them a brand experience, and we got them to buy into that brand experience 100% before they even went out and said anything about, like before they even got a single cent for it. And I think the point there is almost back to your point as well, is like, when it's authentic content and when the consumers or when the influencers believe in it, that is when they're going to get that brand message across to their consumers in a very authentic way. And that is when your conversion happens. Unfortunately, like, how much control does a brand have over that, you know?
Yeah.
But yeah, those two are really good examples for me.
Anything else? Cool. I think moving on to our last topic, which is obviously one close to my heart, my background, is experiential and activations. I mentioned it earlier, but this medium is often perceived to be very expensive, with little sales ROI or linked to sales. So I guess, how do we make it work harder and integrate into the digital channels better? And I guess, like, what I'm saying, in other words, how do we make it more than just photo booth images being uploaded and Facebook likes?
I think this also goes back to what we discussed on e-commerce, is having shoppable experiences. So if you are having an experiential event or an experiential campaign, closing that gap between the experience and the purchase is going to be really important. So if people are, you know, experiencing your brand or your service, but afterwards they have to then go and Google how to buy it or where it's available, instead of having them, giving them the ability to buy it then and there. This is also similar to the Tommy Hilfiger example that you gave us earlier. It was, you know, they had a live show?
Live show online that you could click straight through to.
And
purchase.
you could just go purchase it right from there. So I think also when you're talking about measurement, but later as well, it's just closing that gap between giving them the experience and allowing them to actually purchase through the digital channel while they're there.
Me. I didn't make any notes, I forgot about that, so I'm just going to wing it. Experiential marketing. So a lot of marketers want to go, experience is happening, let's link it to sales. The sales, obviously digital or in-store, whatever the case might be, like forced. And I think that it's a journey. Like, a consumer goes through a journey, and the journey starts in one point and ends in another point. And if you think about the generations at the moment, like Generation C, which is like the connected peeps, they're constantly bombarded with like digital, sale this, buy this, messaging just coming and flying at you. In order to kind of like break through that clutter, maybe it's not on that channel. So for me, experience is an opportunity to reach the unreachables through a different channel and deliver a message. Then continue that conversation in an unforceful way on a different channel, which is digital in this case. And then kind of like living almost like with your consumer until that sale is made, so that that cycle can kind of like continue. So yes, digital is an important part of experience, so that we can fulfill the sales part or the ROI part. But I do think that it's not, so life is long and short. So it's short in the sense that salespeople want to make the sales, they want to sell all the stuff. But it's also long, and you must remember it's a relationship that you're forming with your consumer. So you might start on one channel and it might go over into another channel, but it might also take like a couple of months before that person purchases. So if we see these things not as channels but as journeys within our consumers, I think we will make some really kind of like impactful experiences. And we must just know that these are humans behind that experience, and they always want like a human connection Brene Brown, human connection, that's all we want. And if brands can offer that, like it's definitely a space where, yeah.
Completely. You had a good example earlier.
Oh, yes. So it was actually related to your point about continuing the conversation, and digital is a great way to do that. So one of the examples we chatted about was, I don't know if you guys remember it, but there was a granny who turned 60, and her daughter asked her, what do you want for your birthday? And she says, you know what, all I really wanted was to be locked in an exclusive box with a flask of coffee and some snacks overnight. And Exclusive Books is a bookstore. And her daughter actually contacted the CEO and said, look, can you actually do this for my mom? And they did it at Hyde Park. This granny turned 60, she got her wish. She got to spend a night in the Hyde Park Exclusive Books. A neighboring store actually supplied the bed and the bedding and all of it. They gave her snacks, and she spent the whole night locked in an Exclusive Books. And the reason why we heard about it is because the story broke on social media. The daughter tweeted that my mom is staying at an Exclusive Books, and I think what was great about it was it's such an aspirational event. Haven't we all wanted to be locked in a shop or in a Woolies or a, House and Leisure magazine store thing? And I think what was great about it is that conversation just lived on social media. Obviously, they did their PR around it, but we continued talking about it. Even now, I still talk about that granny who stayed at Exclusive Books, but I won't remember an Exclusive Books advert in my timeline. Or a sale, but I'll always remember that aspirational moment was so personal, and we shared it as though it was our granny that stayed there, overnight. So I thought, that's a great use of digital, not just to, close the gap with sales, but to continue the conversation and keep talking about Exclusive Books continuously. Keep referring to that event. So,
but it almost kind of like comes back to the first question, like what is more important? Is it clicks or is it a brand experience?
Yeah.
And I think like the right brand experience and the right time of that product development is so critical. So maybe it's just timing more than...
It's always the quest to get from, especially on the experiential front, to get from the experience to the sale. I think digital and e-commerce is a very good link and helps us do that a lot easier, because I think marketing and sales is still very separated. So how do we link them together? And I think digital helps us do that a little bit easier on the online sale, I guess.
Yeah.
Anything else, guys?
No questions.
I think that's all from us.
I think you must get the box thing and
so-
throw it.
oh yes, let's throw the box.
Does anyone have any questions for the panelists?
Does it have a mic? Oh, wow. Hi guys, my name is Donald Mokhale. I'm the General Manager of Process Club South Africa. And the question I have is for you, Mal. I think you said earlier on that e-commerce was kind of disrupting a lot of the informal markets as well. And I just wanted some examples of what that looks like. You mentioned a little bit of mobile and payment gateways. Kind of what do we have currently in South Africa and what's kind of growing in that space?
Okay, so I have a great example. It's actually, it's a Kenyan example, but I'm seeing a startup at the moment that's doing it in South Africa. They are building an app for agriculture and for farmers, where they send things like stock prices and any change in kind of the price of their produce and any kind of market-related information that they're using to send that information right to farmers and viticulturists as well. So I think there's a method there that I'd like to apply to mobile commerce, which is reaching people in what we call unreachable areas with information that's relevant to them. So it's something called M-Farm or something like that. But I think from a distribution of content, that's a great example. We're also seeing mobile payments becoming a little bit easier and a little bit more open for spaza shop owners as well. So you have these apps that allow them to partner with their bank. And allows them to have cashless transactions. There's another great example called Yoko. I'm not sure if you've seen Yoko before. It's also it kind of replaces what we'd call like a cash a ring up system, like what is that thing called, like a Zen kind of little transaction app that you have. All it does is that it fits onto your phone and allows you to make payments. So you can actually swipe your card, and you don't need this big piece of technology. It's actually this big, and you slot it into your phone, and that's how you can use it to make transactions in a shop. So those are some great examples that I'm seeing. It's a little bit difficult because of the cell phone reception in some of these areas, so sometimes your payment doesn't go through. But I think everyone's working towards solving those infrastructure problems. But a great example is go look up Yoko and have a look at how they're enabling people to run their businesses anyway and allow them to remove the cash aspect of that transaction, so you can tap your card and make mobile payments.
I think that you're right, there's so many different examples. Snapchats, there's SnapScan, all those kinds of things. And there's wallets, and there's Luna, and there's Bitcoin. And so there's so many examples of apps and things out there. I think the problem is that we still have to break through a bit of a trust human behavior before we actually can get some adoption of those different technologies. Like you're going from a situation where people are unbanked to, so we, more privileged people have gone from, okay, great, my cash is banked, and this is a different form of banking with lower rates, we all hope. Now you have to go from unbanked to completely, you're skipping a step. So I think like more in those environments, the challenge and the problem to solve there would be to how do you actually resolve the trust? How do you resolve the human behavior behind that specific kind of like transaction engagement, rather than, because the tools are there, the technology is there. I mean, we can send some balloons up into the air to get the Wi-Fi there if we needed to, but it's that trust that ultimately, it's all, like we're all digital. Everyone is like digital, and digital's great, and technology is great, but there's a human behind the other side. And if we are not understanding how that human believes and trusts and uses things, our technology will never match. I don't know if that answers your question, but cool.
So we have another question here in the back.
Hi. Sorry. So I just want to add on to the conversation you were having with him. I come from Tanzania, and we have mobile banking. We have M-Pesa, which is run by Vodacom. We don't have a trust issue there. In fact, more people trust the mobile banking sector than they do the banks. More people, even now when I'm trying to buy something online, we don't use our debit cards. So I had actually problems paying for coming to this conference with my debit card because we're so accustomed to paying with our mobile money. First of all, the transaction fees are less, and I can withdraw more than I can if with the bank because the central bank system limits it more. But also people who are in remote regions can actually transfer money and trust the mobile banking system than they do the actual banks. So it's always something that I wonder why it hasn't been adopted outside of East Africa, because that technology has disrupted the banking system. The central banks have had to bail out the banks that are there. The banks like Barclays and others have had to change their models so that they are now supporting the mobile money system so that people can withdraw cash or send money. There was actually an article about when people collect salaries from their banks, they would transfer it immediately into their mobile banking system there. Because if something went wrong, they found that when they called customer service at Vodacom, the response was quicker than it was with the banking system. So I don't understand how it hasn't reached other regions, but it has been a complete disruptive technology in East Africa.
That's such a great example.
Yeah, it's so interesting.
I get very excited when anything is decentralized. Maybe a bit of a rebel, but anything that kind of like challenges existing kind of like centralized things, like you said, the banks now have to adapt in order to kind of like compete with what is already out there. But what do you think it is? Do you think it's, so I believe it's trust.
I think in Tanzania and in Kenya,
Safe.
Access. Sure.
the government banks are in remote regions where people with lower incomes are.
Yeah.
But the mobile money is at every single shop, every single petrol station. So you can transfer money from, if you live in a big city, you can send it to your parents who live in a very remote region and they have access to withdraw. So there are no limitations to access those funds. And I think it's because of the customer service that Vodacom has provided, in that if you transfer money and it goes into the wrong account, you can get it back. Because all the mobile networks are somehow working together so that if there is a mistake, they correct it immediately and they block the funds. Whereas I think with the banking system, it would take me a day, they'd send me an email, then it's that whole process of waiting. So I think it's the service, to be honest, and the access.
Yeah, it's a really good example.
Great.
I remember M-Pesa started in South Africa, but it didn't take off. They tried to launch it. There was a lot of... we also have a huge issue with our own mobile service providers. So MTN and Vodacom, and they all have very different ways of operating. So what happened is, I think they tried to launch M-Pesa a few years ago. Yeah, and it didn't take off very well. We also have banks blocking any kind of progress that they don't own.
I don't know how they've managed to do that, sorry. But they've managed to do like money transactions even when you don't have network. And the competitors that are coming up, like now they have Nala, you don't need to be connected at all.
Wow.
Where you can transfer.
Amazing.
So that's very disruptive to the banking sector there.
I think we're so far behind. Just a few years ago, you weren't able to buy airtime on your banking app if you didn't have airtime. I don't know if anyone's experienced that, but that used to happen to me when like the first banking apps started coming. You wanted to buy airtime through your app, but you couldn't because you had no airtime. There was no way to actually do a transaction without having airtime using an app.
So does anybody have any other questions they want to ask the panelists?
Is it working?
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's Rul here from the Oracle team. So as you mentioned, the industry, is becoming very money-focused, right? Very ROI-driven. And with a lot of the disruptive technologies, it's become very price competitive, as well as a lot of the brands are starting to do a lot of the work in-house. So how as a creative agency do you stay relevant within the next, let's say, next 5 to 10 years?
That is a very good question and one we ask ourselves every morning, literally. Do you want to answer it?
I think, in the last, even like I could say 6 months or a year, especially in South Africa, the environment has become very cluttered and very competitive. And competitive. So, everyone's doing marketing, and above the line agencies are doing below the line. Everyone's doing digital, and I think you have to differentiate yourself. And I guess I touched that point a little bit earlier about how do we get it from marketing and being a marketing agency, but also pushing it to sales. And if we can join those two together, I think you've got an offering that no one else can do. So just constantly making sure we're not just doing the fluffy old school marketing. No one wants that anymore. No one has budget for that anymore. You have to be pushing the ROI and the sales, and you have to be linking it together. But it's harder to do than you think, and I think we've been trying as an agency on the elevator side to do more and more of that. But the teams are so segregated, especially here, the marketing, sales teams, even the agencies, the brand teams on the client side, and I guess the business teams on our side, we've got Swollen, which is a very focused retail sales business, and elevator marketing. We talk different languages, so it's a longer thing to do than we think. But how do we push it and just keep connecting the two? And I think it's going to be a slow process, but if we're not doing that, you're going to become irrelevant.
Yeah, I still think creativity is a very kind of important part in running a business. And if you have a look at, like, for example, the latest apps like Uber and YouCook and those guys, it all came from like a creative idea, and the execution is what makes it. And I think, so creativity is one part of our business, but I think a bigger part of what we do is we have to understand our client's business better than they understand their business in order to apply creativity. So they understand the logistics, our clients understand the logistics, they understand the industry as a whole. We need to understand that and be able to plug in the creative so that we can differentiate, because that's something that they can't do at this point in time. And then, like Kath said, that plus making sure that all departments are kind of like talking the same language, working in the same direction, is also something that will differentiate us to in-house companies. Because like, if you start measuring things just by ROI, I really don't believe that you're going to make much of a difference. You're always going to get your product into a commodity space. Our consumers, if you just look at consumers and look at like the typical framework of Generation Y, they are so unloyal. They even to gender, like it freaks my brain. Anyway, so they are so unloyal. Like even in their day-to-day lives, they're not going to be loyal to a brand. And then, so in the past, the strategy was like you entice them with a sale, and then they'll come in and they experience it, and then they'll trust it, and therefore they'll be loyal to it. It doesn't happen like that anymore. So I think one has to approach that in such a different way. Yeah, and it's exciting to try and find that balance.
We had the opposite with some of my brands. I found consumers are fiercely loyal to the brands that hold their trust. You continue using a brand and it gives them an opportunity to make a few mistakes. You're more forgiving to a brand or a service if they make a few mistakes along the way, because of that trust that they've built up. And I'm like that too. There are some brands I'm fiercely loyal to, but if they break that trust, I guess it does come back to that. I feel like it's okay, I'll come back to you if you're open about your communication, and if you told us what happened and you told us how you're going to fix it. So I've had almost the opposite experience of people not being loyal to brands. I found that they're actually even more loyal now to fewer brands.
So I want to thank our panelists. By the way, fantastic topic. Lots of great questions from everyone. If you all have any questions, any additional questions for them afterwards, make sure you stop by and meet them at the networking session. But let's make sure we give them a big round of applause.